In 1968, a government wanted to silence its students before the Olympic Games began. So they sent their own agents into the crowd in civilian clothes and had them fire on their own soldiers. What happened next, they call it an accident. It wasn't. I want to tell you about the moment I heard about this. I was scrolling online and I came across a video. The singer was right at the front on the stage. He was singing his songs and everybody was dancing, enjoying themselves. A normal night. And then the ceiling came down. This is the nightclub catastrophe in the Dominican Republic. People started screaming. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I watched it again and I still couldn't believe it. And then more videos started showing up from different angles. And then the ones that really got to me were the videos posted by the people who were still inside, trapped, injured, under the rubble. I saw blood. I heard people crying out. I couldn't sleep for like a week. I remember zoning out at random times of the day, thinking about the whole country, even from afar. I know one of the musicians that was there, and he made it out, thank God. But Ruby Perez, one of the greatest voices in Dominican music, didn't make it. He was found alive under the rubble, singing, so the rescuers could hear him and find him, and then he died. And then another story started coming out. Someone who worked at the club had warned the owner about the roof hours before the show started. He said, cancel it. The owner said no. The building had been renovated without the right permits, without proper inspections. Nobody stepped in to say, this is not safe. The owners weren't arrested until 2 months later. The first court date didn't happen until almost a year after. And right now, today, the families of the 236 people are still out there demanding answers, demanding justice, still waiting. There is something almost universal about this experience. You see something happened, and then the people whose only job is to bring justice, they either lie to you or they slow walk it until you give up. Maybe you've lost a family member to violence, or you were tricked, scammed into believing what someone else was selling to you. Or maybe it's something bigger, a well known government conspiracy with overwhelming evidence of injustice. And still, the news tell you a different story. When you've been wronged, the desire for justice does not go away. But the hardest part isn't even the injustice itself. The hardest part is what happens after. When you start to wonder, maybe I have it wrong. Maybe I am the one who doesn't understand the full picture. When the silence around you starts to feel like evidence against you. When you feel you're being gaslighted. But across history, in every culture, in every era, there have been people who couldn't let it go because they couldn't reconcile what they knew to be true with what they're being told to accept. And the people in power almost always underestimate them. They count on time, on exhaustion, on the very human desire to move on. They're almost always wrong because the truth has a strange kind of endurance. You can suppress it, delay it under an official story, and clean up the record, but it has a way of outlasting the people who buried it. What happened in Mexico City in the fall of 1968 is proof of that. It is 1968. The world is on fire. And not metaphorically. In Paris, students are throwing cobblestones at riot police and shutting down the entire French government. In Prague, Soviet tanks are rolling through the streets to crush a democratic uprising. In the United States, cities are still smoldering from the riots after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. Robert Kennedy is shot dead in a hotel kitchen in Los Angeles. The Vietnam War is tearing a country apart. Young people everywhere in Germany, in Italy, Japan, Argentina are standing up and demanding to be heard. 1968 is the year the generation that grew up after World War II looks at the world as it was and said, this is not good enough. And Mexico is not the exception. Mexico in 1968 is in many ways a success story, at least on the surface. The economy is growing. Mexico is modern and prosperous. And in just a few weeks, Mexico City is about to host the Summer Olympics, the first time the Games have been held in Latin America. The whole world is watching. President Gustavo Diaz Ordaz has staked his legacy and his country's international reputation on those games going perfectly. But underneath the surface, something is building. Mexico has been ruled by a single political party, the PRI, the Institutional Revolutionary Party, for nearly 40 years. Every president since 1929 has been from the same party. Opposition is tolerated in small ways and crushed in large ones. Students at the university have no real voice. Journalists write carefully. The government decides what's amplified or suppressed. And for a growing number of young Mexicans, particularly students at the great universities, Mexico has its ideals and then it has a reality. And for a lot of young people, those two things do not match at all. It starts the way things often do, with something small. In late July, two rival high school groups get into a brawl in a marketplace near Mexico City. It is the kind of thing that happens. Teenagers, a street fight, nothing more. But when the riot police arrive the next day, they do not just break it up. They wade into the school buildings with clubs. They beat students and teachers without distinguishing one from another. They are not there to restore order. They are there to make a point. The students respond. They take to the streets to protest the beatings. The police responds with more force. The protest grows larger. Within weeks, what started as a brawl between two rival high school groups has become one of the largest democratic movements in Mexican history. Students at UNAM, from the Polytechnic Institute, from schools across the city are striking, marching, demanding to be heard. They're not calling for revolution. Their demands are specific and measured. Release the political prisoners and end police brutality. They want dialogue with the government and basic civil rights. By July 27th, 500,000 people are marching through Mexico City toward the Zócalo, the main public square, directly in front of the presidential palace. Workers, teachers, parents, ordinary Mexicans who have never been in a protest in their lives. They are walking alongside the students. The movement has outgrown the universities and become broader, something harder to ignore. President Diaz Ordaz watches all of this and sees one thing, a threat, not to the country, to the image of the country, to the Olympic Games, to him. 10 days before the opening ceremonies, the world is about to arrive in Mexico City. Cameras, journalists, diplomats, athletes from every nation on earth. And there are 500,000 people in the streets. That cannot stand. October 1st, 1968. The army withdraws from the university campus. It is an olive branch, or something that looks like one. The student leaders breathe a little easier. Maybe a dialogue is possible. Maybe the government is willing to talk. They schedule a rally for the following afternoon, October 2nd. A peaceful assembly at the Plaza de las Tres Culturas, the Plaza of the Three Cultures, in the Tlatelolco neighborhood on the north side of the city. The name of the plaza is not accidental. It is one of the most historically layered places in all of Mexico. Stand at the center of it, and you can see three civilizations at once: Aztec ruins from before the Spanish arrived, a Franciscan church built by the conquistadors in the 1500s, and the modern apartment towers and government buildings of the 1960s. Three eras, three worlds, all standing in the same square. The students choose it deliberately. This is where the Aztec civilization surrendered to the Spanish in 1521, where the old world ended and something new and brutal began. They want the symbolism to speak. On the morning of October 2nd, before the sun is fully up, something unusual is happening in Tlatelolco. Soldiers are taking up positions in the corners of the plaza deliberately. Military vehicles are positioning themselves on the streets around the neighborhood. Snipers, dressed in civilian clothes, are slipping into the upper floors of the apartment buildings surrounding the square. They carry a small identifier, a white glove in the left hand, so they can recognize each other in the chaos that is coming. These are members of the Batallón Olympia, the Olympic Battalion, a paramilitary unit created by the government supposedly to provide security for the Games. In reality, they have spent the entire summer infiltrating the student movement, attending meetings, mapping leaders, building the intelligence picture the government will need for what's being planned under the code name Operation Galeana. The operation is simple: arrest the student leaders, scatter the movement, end this before the world arrives. By late afternoon, somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 people are gathered in the plaza of the three cultures. Students, yes, but also workers, mothers, children, people from the neighborhood who have come to listen. The speeches are beginning from the third floor balcony of the Chihuahua building, one of the apartment towers overlooking the square. The crowd is calm, there is no violence, no weapons among the protesters. People are standing in the October evening listening to the speakers. No one knows what is already in position around them. At approximately 6:10 in the evening, a helicopter appears above the plaza. Green and red flares drop from it into the crowd. That is the signal. The snipers in the buildings, the men with the white gloves, open fire not to the students, at the soldiers positioned in the plaza below. The army suddenly takes gunfire from above. Believe the students have opened fire on them. They turn their weapons on the crowd. What follow lasts nearly 2 hours. Soldiers fire into the crowd from three sides. Tanks position themselves on the streets surrounding the plaza. People run, fall, pressed against walls. Students scramble into the apartment buildings trying to escape. Soldiers follow them in without warrants, dragging people out of the stairwells, out of the apartments of families who have nothing to do with any of this. More than 5,000 people are arrested that night and in days that follow. Many are taken to the old convent adjacent to the square. They are made to strip to their underwear. The bodies are removed quickly before the press can photograph them, before anyone can count them. The plaza is hosed down. Journalists who are present have their films confiscated. Italian journalist Oriana Fallaci is shot in the leg trying to escape. Several foreign reporters are detained. The message is clear. Whatever you think you saw tonight, you did not see it. The next morning, the Mexican government releases a statement. Four people died. Students have fired on the army, and the army have responded to defend itself. Order has been restored. The Olympic Games will proceed as planned. 10 days later, the Olympic Games open. Gustavo Diaz Ordaz walks into the Olympic Stadium, smiling, waving before the cameras of the world. The opening ceremony is beautiful. The torch is lit. The athletes march. The world watches and applauds Mexico. No one mentions the Plaza of the Three Cultures. No one mentions the students who are still in prison. The families are still looking for their sons and daughters. The survivors who watched people die next to them are now being told it never happened. The cover up is not difficult. Mexico in 1968 has no free press, not really. The newspapers print what the government tells them. The official death toll stays at 4, then creeps up to 20 something over the following years. Witnesses are afraid to speak. The student movement dissolved within months. The leaders who aren't in prison quietly disappear back into their lives. No one is ever charged. No investigation is opened. The man who commanded the national security apparatus that night, the man who oversaw the Olympic battalion, who sat at the center of the strategy to end the movement, his name is Luis Echevarria. He is the interior minister under Diaz Ordaz. 2 years after Tlatelolco, Luis Echevarria becomes president of Mexico. He serves 6 years. He is never tried. He is never formally held to account for that October evening. President Diaz Ordaz, for his part, eventually acknowledges the massacre on his own terms, in a way that changes nothing. He says history will judge him. He's not wrong, but the judgment comes decades too late for anyone who was in that plaza. The survivors don't forget that night. Some of them spent years, decades, simply trying to get someone in power to acknowledge what happened and open a real investigation, to say it out loud, to put a real number on the dead. Hundreds, probably, maybe more. The bodies were removed so quickly, so efficiently, that the true count is never established. For 30 years, Tlatelolco has a wound that Mexico cannot look at directly. It is present everywhere, in poems, in secret conversations, never acknowledged, never apologized for. It is not until the year 2000, 32 years later, that something changes. In that year, Mexico holds a presidential election. Since 1929, the PRI loses. A man named Vicente Fox wins. The one party era is over. One of the first things Fox does is to order the creation of a special prosecutor's office to investigate the crimes of 1968. For the first times, archives begin to open. Documents surface. Declassified American government records begin to fill in the picture of what was planned and by whom. Some of those records show CIA had informants at the highest levels of the Mexican government, including Diaz Ordaz himself. The documents confirm what the survivors always knew. The flares from the helicopters were a deliberate signal. The soldiers who fired first were government agents in civilian clothes. The students had no weapons. They were not a threat to the Olympics. They were not a communist conspiracy. They were students, workers, kids from the neighborhood who walked over to listen to speeches on a Wednesday evening. They were killed because they were inconvenient. In 2006, a Mexican judge orders the arrest of the former president Luis Echevarria on genocide charges. He is 84 years old. He is placed under house arrest. His lawyers fight it. The charges are eventually dismissed on a legal technicality. He is never tried. He dies in 2022 at the age of 100, the longest lived president in Mexican history, without ever standing before a court to answer for the night of October 2nd, 1968. On October 2nd, 2024, 56 years later after the massacre, the Mexico president stands before the country and issues a formal official apology on behalf of the Mexican state. This is the first time the government says, in those words, we did this and it was wrong. The survivors are old now. The families of those who never came home are old. They have been waiting for 56 years for those words. The Plaza of the Three Cultures still stands. You can walk to the spot where the students stood that evening, look up to the third floor balcony of the Chihuahua building, and try to imagine what it looked like. Every year on October 2nd, people march through Mexico City to the plaza. They carry photographs of the dead. They chant the phrase that became the heartbeat of every anniversary since 1968. Six words that refuse to let the silence win. 2 de octubre no se olvida. October 2nd is not forgotten. There is a monument near the plaza now. A simple stone slab. It reads, "The 2nd of October will not be forgotten." Not a triumph, not a celebration of victory, just a refusal to let the silence be the last word. The students who marched that summer did not win. Their movement was crushed before it could become anything more. Not one of their six demands was met in their lifetime in any way they imagined. But historians, looking back at 1968, see something they could not have seen then. The massacre and the cover up and the way it was handled started something. A generation of Mexicans who had watched their government murder its own students and then lie about what it did. That generation became the parents and teachers and voters who, over the following decades, pushed and pushed and pushed at the walls of the one party state. Until the year 2000, those walls finally came down. They did not live to see it, many of them, but the thing they started did not die in the plaza. It just took a very long time. Sweetie, the first shots came from the government's own agent. It was a setup. Do you see the Mexican government differently back then compared to now?
For me, yes and no. And I'll tell you why. Yes, I see it differently because back then they seemed so shameless. It's not as on your face as I think it was before. And at the same time, I'm not surprised. I don't see any difference. You see, like I lived in Mexico for 13 years. Where I live is not as violent as, not all Mexico is violent. There's parts that they are, there's parts that are not. Where I'm from, it's not. So, in part, is like even though you live in a place that is not as violent, that is calm, if you could say that, you still somehow, that the government is corrupt. Even though there's no violence where you live, or maybe the news doesn't spread as wide as where you live to hear about these bad things that are happening. At least when I used to live there, because there was no social media, just the TV telling you what's going on, the newspapers. So it's like I feel this is like something that every Mexican knows, even if you live in an area that is not violent.
Violent.
Everyone knows that the government is corrupt.
I saw, I think last month, I think we talked about it,
Mm-hmm.
when the cartel took to the streets of a bunch of states and
Mm-hmm.
set cars on fire
Yeah.
and gas stations, setting blockades in major streets. And it happened because the military killed a cartel boss or something.
No mancho.
But the thing is, the fact that the government appears to live with the criminal activity from the cartel as if it was normal was the part that was shocking to me. Because Sheinbaum, that's her name, Claudia Sheinbaum, the
I don't
president.
even know how to say her last name, to be honest with
Sheinbaum,
you.
I think it's Sheinbaum. She was saying like remain calm to the people. It
But everything was on fire. Yes.
it was surprising to me. If there is a criminal organization in any country and they go out and take the street and set everything on fire, it should tell you how corrupt or afraid the government is of the cartel.
There is a town right at the border from US from America and Mexico. There, since the 90s, women, teenagers, ladies, older women have been disappearing. And sometimes their bodies are found, sometimes their bodies are not found. And up to today, nobody knows who's doing that. And it's not about who. No one has been able to figure out why it's happening. No one has been able to find the majority of the women,
Or who's doing it.
and the authorities are being so slow to take action to what's happening since the 90s. Since the 90s, and it's just only women.
So basically, the government has not changed.
That's why I
See,
said I'm not surprised.
before or after 1968.
Yeah.
That's very unfortunate.
Hmm?
But
Mexico's a great country.
yeah,
That's the only one
Okay,
thing.
yes, we're not. We love Mex. My wife is Mexican, right here. I love her. I'm not gonna say to death because that would speak very badly of Mexico. But sweetie, speaking a little bit more seriously, they targeted students who came to listen to speeches. How would someone try to justify something like this?
There's no justification for it. That was an evil act. And let me tell you something. There is something similar that happened in recent years. Back in 2014, a group of students were trying to gather buses for Tlatelolco. So they were gathering the buses, and for some reason, they got into a confrontation with the police. So they started fighting with the police, and some students ended up dead.
Okay.
And some of them were taken by the police. Or actually, 43 students were taken by the police, and they never came back home.
Wow.
They never make it back home. They up to today have been able to identify, I think, three of the students because they found remains.
But you know what's something beautiful about this story? Even though it's infuriating, is that people still march to that plaza every October 2nd, 57 years later. What does it mean to you that ordinary people kept that memory alive?
You know, there's a quote that says, they tried to bury us, but they didn't know we were seeds. And what this means is that even after all that has happened, because Mexico has been through a lot, not just 1968, but even before that, it's just a reminder that they're preparing the soil for people to come out stronger. And I think that's what takes or makes the essence of the Mexican people. Our country has done terrible things to its people. The people in Mexico are living their lives, trying to go through it. I feel that that's what makes every Mexican really awesome.
I want to be honest with you for a second. Stories like this one make me angry. And I think that's the right response. What happened in that plaza was wrong. The cover up was even worse. The fact that the man who ran the operation became president 2 years later and died 100 years old, never tried, never convicted, that it's incredibly unfair. And I think you should feel that. But I also know what happens when anger has nowhere to go. Good people have been consumed by injustice, waiting for the accountability that never came. And the waiting itself became its own prison. The survivors of Tlatelolco didn't all get justice. Echeverria was never convicted. The bodies were never fully counted. What they got, 56 years later, was an apology, words. And for those families, by then it was too late. That is a hard thing to struggle with for years. But here's what I learned: anger is energy, and energy has to go somewhere. Think about the families of the nightclub collapse, the ones I mentioned at the beginning, the ones still showing up to interviews years later, still demanding. They didn't swallow their grief, they didn't disappear into silence. Their anger became the reason the owners are in court today. That is what anger looks like when it finds a purpose. But here is what my faith tells me. And I say this not to preach, just to be honest where I land. Justice delayed is not justice denied. Let me repeat that part. Justice delayed is not justice denied. The accounting that didn't happen in a Mexican court, it didn't disappear, it didn't expire. God's timeline is not the same as ours. And the people who were in that plaza on October 2nd, 1968, they are not forgotten where it matters most. That doesn't make the injustice acceptable, of course. It doesn't mean we stop demanding better, but it means the anger doesn't have to be the last word inside you. You can grieve what wasn't made right. You can name it clearly. And then you can focus it on something larger than any court can deliver. I'm not going to tell you to get over it, but I want to offer this one thing. The people of Tlatelolco found a way to keep going, not because the anger went away, but because they gave the truth somewhere to live and trusted that the rest was not theirs to live with alone. You can do that too. If you're listening or watching to this right now, you might be holding onto something heavy: an injustice that was never made right, a wrong that was never acknowledged, a wound that people who caused it never came back to address. And that weight is real. The anger attached to it is real. But you can let it turn inward into bitterness, into resignation, into the quiet belief that nothing ever really changes and there is no point on trying. A lot of people end up there, and I understand how you get there. Or you can take it to God, not to pretend it didn't happen, but to say, I cannot live with this alone anymore. I cannot be the one to make this right. I am handing you the part that is not mine to hold. And what comes back, what I have seen come back in people who do that, is not emptiness. It has a purpose, a clarity about what they're supposed to do with the tears they have left, a direction for the energy that the anger was consuming. The students who survived the plaza in 1968, many of them became journalists. The parents, the teachers, who spent the next 30 years dismantling the system that tried to silence them. They didn't waste what happened to them, it led them somewhere. So, whatever you're carrying today, bring it. Bring the anger, bring the grief of waiting for justice that hasn't come yet. Bring it all to God and then watch what He does with it. In 1968, a government looked at 10,000 people in a plaza and decided their story was theirs to write. They cleaned up the square. They opened the Olympics 10 days later and smiled to the world. And for a while, it worked. But the people who were there that night would not let it be the whole story. They held to the truth in the only place the government couldn't reach it, inside them. Years and years after, October after October, until the truth outlasted everyone who tried to bury it. That is what we hope you take with you today. Not just the history, but the reminder that your pain is not wasted, your anger is not pointless, and the injustice that you're living with, God has not forgotten it. His timeline is not ours, but His justice is coming. In the meantime, let it give you purpose. Let it make you someone who tells the truth, someone who remembers accurately, someone who will not let the lies be passed on to the next generation. The world needs more people like that. Thank you for watching History I Just Learned. If this episode meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. See you next time. Bye bye.